There are things in this world that we can't explain. Things that slip between the cracks of our reality and into the shadows. What if one night you came face to face with something so dark, so evil, that you couldn't escape? Something not of this world, but from the very depths of hell. This is the story of a man who never believed in demons. That is, until he met one. For Jason, the move to the old house on the outskirts of town was supposed to be a fresh start. After a messy divorce, he needed a change. The house was cheap, tucked away from the busy city life, and perfect for someone who wanted peace and solitude. It wasn't the kind of house you would expect to find in a quiet neighborhood. The windows were dark, the paint chipped and faded, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. But it was affordable, and Jason didn't mind a little work. After all, he had always enjoyed the idea of fixing things up. From the moment he moved in, there was an odd feeling about the place. The air seemed thick, as if something was waiting. But Jason shrugged it off. He wasn't the type to believe in superstitions. On the first night, as he settled into his new home, he felt oddly isolated. There were no sounds from the street, no voices from the neighbors, just silence. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was an unnerving silence. But still, Jason thought it was just the newness of the place, the unfamiliarity. He tried to sleep, but something kept him awake. The feeling that he wasn't alone. His eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing to see. Just the shadows, the creaks of an old house settling. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The first real sign came a few days later. Jason had been unpacking his boxes when he found an old antique mirror in the attic. It was covered in dust, and the glass was cracked. It looked like something that had been forgotten for years. But for some reason, Jason couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It had a certain charm about it. He placed the mirror in the living room near the window, where the sunlight could hit it just right. That night, he stood in front of it, admiring the way the light reflected off the cracked surface. That was when he saw it, something moving behind him. At first, it was subtle, like a shadow shifting. Jason thought it was his imagination, maybe the dim light playing tricks on his eyes. But then it happened again. This time, he saw a figure, tall, dark, with a hunched back, appearing in the reflection. Jason spun around, but there was nothing there. His heart raced, his hands clammy with sweat. Nothing. It had to be his mind playing tricks on him, right? But the feeling didn't go away. That night, as he lay in bed, trying to push the unsettling thought from his mind, he heard something. Whispers, faint and soft, coming from the direction of the living room. Jason, come closer. Help us. He bolted out of bed, his heart pounding. He rushed to the living room, but there was nothing. The mirror was dark and still. But the whispering, it had never stopped. The days following that night were a blur of unease. Jason tried to push the haunting feeling to the back of his mind, but it lingered. The mirror seemed to draw him in, and every time he looked into it, he saw that shadow, standing behind him, watching him. One evening after a long day of work, Jason came home to find his house completely dark. The power was out. He thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a fuse. But as he moved through the house trying to find the circuit breaker, he noticed something strange. The house felt colder than usual, even though the heat was on. Then, the whispering began again, clearer this time. "Jason!" it called, the voice low and growling like it was right behind him. Jason's body froze. He turned slowly, his breath shallow. But no one was there. The house was empty. "Come closer," the voice urged, followed by the sound of scratching against the wall, as though something was trying to break through. Jason's fear turned to dread. He ran to the living room where the mirror stood. This time, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed it, intending to throw it out, to destroy it, to end whatever was happening. But as he lifted the mirror, he saw it again. The figure was standing right behind him in the reflection. He turned, heart racing, but there was nothing. No one was there. But the reflection, the shadow, it was there, moving closer, its form more distinct. Its eyes, black, soulless, watching him. "Leave, now!" The voice growled, echoing in his mind. Panic surged through him. Jason slammed the mirror to the ground, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The room went silent, but the unease lingered, thick and suffocating. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind outside made him jump. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. Around 3 a.m., he heard it again, the whispering. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, almost like a growl. The air around him turned icy. "Jason!" the voice rasped. This time, it was unmistakable. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a demon. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the living room, but the room was empty. Nothing was there. But as he stood in the middle of the room, he felt a cold, oppressive weight pressing down on him. The air was thick with something evil. "Why did you come here?" the voice boomed, shaking the very walls of the house. Jason's knees buckled, his breath shallow as he felt the presence grow closer. Suddenly, the room went pitch black. The air grew freezing cold, and Jason could hear something scratching, like nails on a chalkboard, growing louder and louder. He spun around, but no matter where he looked, there was nothing. Then it appeared. The demon. A massive shadow towering over him, its form twisted and inverted. Its face was obscured, but Jason could feel its eyes, cold, predatory, and full of malice. It wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real. "You shouldn't have come here," the demon snarled. Its voice was everywhere, vibrating in his bones. "Now you'll never leave." Jason ran for his life, tearing through the house, looking for any way out. But the doors were locked. The windows were shut. The demon was toying with him, moving through the house, appearing in every reflection, in every corner. He could feel it chasing him, always just a step behind. "Leave me alone," Jason screamed, his voice hoarse. Suddenly, he felt something cold and heavy grab his shoulder. He spun around, but there was nothing, just a sudden pressure, like something had gripped his soul. His mind raced. He remembered the one thing that might save him, the salt ritual. He ran to the kitchen, grabbing a salt shaker, and started pouring it into a circle on the floor. He muttered the incantation he had read about in an old book, his voice shaking. "I bind you, demon. You cannot cross." The demon's voice roared in fury as it tried to break through the barrier. But Jason didn't stop. He kept chanting until the room grew silent again. For the first time in days, the house was quiet. Jason stood, gasping for breath, surrounded by salt. Jason moved out of the house the next day, not daring to look back. The demon had left him, but the scars, those would never fade. As he moved on with his life, he often wondered if he had truly escaped. Sometimes, when the night was quiet, when the wind howled through the trees, he'd hear it again, the whispers. "You cannot escape me, Jason. Some doors should never be opened and some demons should never be confronted." Like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying encounters that will make you question what's real. The Black Cat's Warning. They say that animals can sense things we cannot. Things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. What if a simple creature, like a black cat, was trying to warn you? Would you listen, or would you dismiss it as nothing more than superstition? This is the story of a man who ignored the warning of a black cat and paid the price for his disbelief. David had just moved into a new apartment. It was an old building, situated at the edge of town, quiet and tucked away from the hustle and bustle. After a rough breakup and a series of life changes, he felt like a change of scenery was exactly what he needed. The apartment was cheap, spacious, and perfect for someone looking to start fresh. The building had an old charm to it, with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and tall windows that let in just enough sunlight to brighten up the place. The kind of place that seemed to have history, but was also steeped in mystery. David settled in quickly. He unpacked his things, set up his furniture, and spent the first few nights in peace, trying to adjust to his new surroundings. But as the days went by, he began to notice something strange. It started small. The apartment seemed too quiet. No sounds of traffic, no distant chatter, just silence. And sometimes when he walked into certain rooms, he would catch a chill in the air, even though the heating was on. Then, one evening, as David returned home from work, he saw a black cat sitting on the stoop of the building. It was staring at him with intense eyes, unmoving, like it was waiting for him. He glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. He chalked it up to a stray cat and stepped past it, trying not to pay it much attention. But the cat didn't leave. It followed him into the building and watched him as he entered his apartment. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It was an unsettling presence, but he shook it off. The cat meowed once, then disappeared into the hallway. David didn't think much of it. He had always been indifferent to superstitions about black cats. They were just animals. But the encounter left him with an uneasy feeling that he couldn't shake. The first warning. That night, David lay in bed, tossing and turning. The room felt unusually cold, the shadows of the walls stretching long across the floor. His mind raced as he thought about his past, his failed relationships, and his uncertain future. And then, from somewhere in the apartment, he heard a faint scratching noise. It was coming from the door to his bedroom. It was a slow, deliberate scratch, like claws dragging across wood. David sat up in bed, his heart racing. He glanced at the door, but there was nothing there. The room was silent again. He stood up, walking toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, the scratching noise came again, louder, more urgent. He flung open the door, expecting to find an intruder or some sort of animal, but there was nothing there. The hallway outside was completely empty. The apartment felt strangely cold, and the silence was oppressive. He glanced toward the window, noticing that the night outside had become unnaturally still, as if the world had paused. That was when he saw it, the black cat. It was sitting in the hallway, staring at him. Its eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was as if the cat was watching him, waiting for him to understand something. David took a step back, his breath quickening. The cat's gaze didn't waver. The hairs on his neck stood up, and for the first time since moving in, he felt something close to fear. "You need to leave," the cat seemed to be saying, with its unwavering stare. But David shook his head, pushing the feeling aside. It was just a cat. He had been under stress lately. It was nothing. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the cat was trying to warn him about something. The second warning. The next few days were a blur of tension. David went about his work routine, but he couldn't stop thinking about the cat. He kept seeing it, sitting outside his door, lurking in the hallway, appearing in the corner of his eye when he turned. It always seemed to be waiting, staring at him with those intense eyes, as if it knew something he didn't. One evening, after returning home late from work, David noticed the cat again. This time, it was sitting in the corner of his living room, watching him from the shadows. He froze. This wasn't just some stray cat. There was something unnatural about it, something that made his blood run cold. "What do you want?" David asked, his voice hoarse. The cat didn't move. It just stared, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Then, without warning, it let out a low, guttural growl, its fur standing on end. The hairs on the back of David's neck bristled. Suddenly, a sharp crash came from the kitchen. David whipped around, heart pounding. The lights flickered once, then went out. The apartment was now completely dark, save for the dim light from the cat's eyes. "Leave," the cat whispered, its voice barely audible. David felt his legs tremble beneath him. He stumbled toward the kitchen, but there was nothing there. No broken glass, no reason for the crash. The kitchen was eerily still. He looked back at the cat. This time, it was gone. The disappearance. The following days grew even stranger. The knocking sounds returned, but this time, they weren't confined to the walls. They came from the floors, from the ceilings, from all around him. They were louder now, as if the house itself were alive. David barely slept. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on him, following him through the halls, watching him when he wasn't looking. He tried to ignore it, but the weight of the house, the oppressive silence, was unbearable. Then, one night, as he lay in bed, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Whispers, soft, indistinct, coming from the hallway outside his bedroom. He stood up, his legs shaking, and crept toward the door. The whispers grew louder as he approached. "It's coming." The voice was faint, but it was unmistakable. It was the cat's voice. "The curse is real." The voice echoed in his mind. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the living room, followed by the unmistakable sound of scratching, like claws on wood. David rushed out of his room, his heart pounding. There, in the middle of the living room, was the black cat. Its eyes glowed bright. Its fur bristled and it was hissing, low and menacing. "Leave!" The cat hissed again, its voice clearer now. A warning, a command. And just like that, the cat was gone, vanished, no trace. The curse, unleashed. That night, David sat in his living room, his mind racing. He knew now that something was terribly wrong. He had to leave the apartment, but every time he reached for his coat, the scratching noise would return. Louder this time, closer. He stood up, his pulse racing, and walked to the door. But when he reached for the handle, the lights flickered out. The apartment was plunged into darkness. And then it happened. A cold presence filled the room, like the very air around him was alive and breathing. David's breath hitched in his throat as a figure began to emerge from the shadows. It was tall, shrouded in darkness, with glowing eyes that burned into him. "You should have listened," the figure whispered, its voice cold and distant. David's legs buckled beneath him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The black cat's voice echoed once more, clearer now. "The curse is yours." David felt his vision blur, his body becoming cold as ice. The cat's warning wasn't just a warning, it was a curse. And now, it was too late. The next morning, the apartment was silent. The lights worked again, the scratching sounds had stopped, and the black cat was nowhere to be found. But when David looked into the mirror, he saw something that made his heart stop. A figure, standing behind him in the reflection, its glowing eyes fixed on him. The curse had claimed him, and now there was no escape. Sometimes, the things we ignore are the things that haunt us the most, and some warnings, when ignored, are curses that never end. Like, share, and subscribe if you dare, to hear more warnings that should never be ignored.
The bloody handprint on the window. We all know the feeling of being watched. It's a primal fear that sticks with you, especially when you're alone. But what if that feeling wasn't just in your head? What if someone, was really watching you from the other side of your window? This is the story of a man who came home one night to find something more terrifying than he could ever have imagined: a bloody handprint on his window. Mark had always been a creature of habit. After a long day of work, he would come home, eat something quick, and collapse on the couch to watch TV. His apartment was cozy, nothing fancy, but it was his sanctuary. He'd lived there for 2 years, and in that time, he'd gotten used to the quiet, peaceful nights. But that night, something felt different. It was just after 10 p.m. when he pulled into his parking spot. The streets were empty, the lights in the windows of other apartments off, the world outside silent. Mark unlocked his apartment door, stepped inside, and immediately felt it, an odd chill in the air. It wasn't much, just a slight drop in temperature, but it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He shrugged it off. The apartment was old. It had drafty windows and creaky floors. Nothing to worry about. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and walked to the living room, flicking on the light. But as soon as he turned toward the window, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light. But then, his heart sank. There, on the window, on the inside of the glass, was a bloody handprint. The print was unmistakable. The palm of a hand, smudged across the window, with dark streaks of blood running down the glass. It was large, as if someone had pressed their hand firmly against it, leaving a mark. Mark stood frozen, his mind racing. He could feel the room closing in on him, the silence growing heavier. He walked slowly toward the window, his hand trembling. As he got closer, he saw it more clearly. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a prank. This was real. The blood was fresh. It hadn't dried completely yet. The crimson stains on the glass glistened in the dim light, dripping down in slow, deliberate lines. What the hell? Mark whispered, backing away from the window. His heart was hammering in his chest as he stared at the handprint. His mind raced with questions. How did it get there? Who could have done this? He lived alone. He turned around, eyes scanning the apartment. There was no sign of forced entry. The door was locked, the windows were shut, and everything seemed in order except for that handprint. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silent watcher. Mark immediately grabbed his phone and dialed 911, but as soon as the call connected, he froze. Nothing happened. The phone went completely silent. He hung up and tried again, but the same thing happened. A chill of unease crept over him. Something was blocking him, something he couldn't explain. He rushed to the window, heart pounding in his chest, and yanked the curtains open. He stared out into the dark night, but the street was empty. No one was there. It's just a prank, he told himself, though the words felt hollow in his throat. He forced himself to take a few deep breaths and tried to steady his nerves. He would clean the window, call the landlord, maybe even check for hidden cameras. It was probably just some sick joke. But as he turned away from the window, something made him stop. A soft scratching noise. Mark spun around, his heart leaping in his chest. The scratching came again, faint at first, like fingernails scraping against glass. He walked back to the window and looked out once more, his breath coming in short bursts. But again, there was nothing. Just the dark street, the faint outline of the apartment building across the way. He was about to turn back when the scratching came again, this time from behind him. It was coming from the glass. His blood ran cold. Mark slowly turned around, his eyes scanning the room. And that's when he saw it. The handprint had changed. It was no longer just a print. Now, the fingers were moving, shifting slightly, as if someone was trying to press their hand from the other side. Mark stumbled back, his body trembling. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And then he saw it. A figure, a shadow, standing just outside the window. Its shape was distorted, like it was part of the darkness itself, blending with the night. The figure was still, watching him. But as soon as Mark noticed it, it moved. Slowly, as if it was rising from the ground. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its features were hidden in the darkness. "What do you want?" Mark whispered, his voice shaking. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it pressed its hand against the glass, and the handprint shifted, the fingers curling and stretching in unnatural ways. Mark felt a wave of terror wash over him. This thing, this shadow, this presence, it wasn't just haunting him. It was trying to get inside. Suddenly, the figure tapped against the glass. 3 times. Mark stumbled back, his legs weak, but before he could run, the lights flickered, and the entire apartment went dark. The room was plunged into an inky blackness that felt alive, suffocating. A low, guttural voice echoed through the room, though it wasn't coming from anywhere physical. It was all around him. "You saw me, and now you will never be alone again." The curse of the handprint. The next morning, Mark awoke to find the apartment silent. The power had come back on, but his mind was still reeling from the events of the night before. He stared at the window. The handprint was still there, as fresh as ever. The blood had not dried, and the hand remained imprinted on the glass. He had tried to wipe it clean, but it wouldn't come off. It was as if the blood was part of the glass itself. Mark's thoughts were scattered. He couldn't focus. The incident had left him disoriented, but something told him that he needed to figure out what was happening. He decided to go to the local library and look for any records or stories about the apartment building, or maybe similar occurrences in the neighborhood. As he sat in front of the computer, scrolling through old records, a name caught his eye: Mary Louvette. The name was linked to the building's history. In the early 1900s, Mary Louvette had been the wife of the original owner, and it was said that she died in a tragic accident. She had fallen from the apartment's top floor under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was a suicide. Others whispered that she had been pushed by a man in the shadows. The more Mark read, the more he felt a sense of dread creep over him. The stories about Mary Louvette spoke of strange occurrences in the building after her death. Whispers, sightings, and inexplicable things happening in the rooms. The final entry was a chilling note. Mary Louvette's spirit never left. She still haunts the building, searching for revenge. The air around him grew heavier, and Mark's throat went dry. The handprint on his window wasn't just some prank. It was connected to something far darker, something alive. He needed to leave, but he knew that wasn't possible. The figure, the shadow, the whispering, it had claimed him. The final confrontation. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The apartment felt suffocating, the shadows moving in ways that didn't make sense. The whispering voices had returned, louder this time, and the scratching against the glass was unmistakable. He ran to the window, his body drenched in sweat. The handprint was alive, growing, changing shape. He could hear the soft tapping on the glass again. 3 taps. The shadow outside the window had returned. He wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut. Mark spun around. The room was filled with darkness, but in the center of it stood a figure, the shadow, its form solidifying, the features becoming clearer. "You've seen too much, Mark," the voice whispered. "Now you belong to me." Before Mark could react, the room plunged into darkness once again. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him, and then the figure was right in front of him, its face twisting into a horrific, gnarled smile. The next morning, Mark's apartment was empty. No sign of him, no trace of the terror he had experienced. The handprint on the window remained. The shadows waited, and the curse of the bloody handprint would continue to claim anyone foolish enough to live in the building. Some spirits never leave, and some handprints are never meant to be wiped away. Like, share, and subscribe for more chilling stories that will make you question what's lurking outside your window.